Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Deliciously Decayed. I am Rick.
And I'm Dev. Today we're exploring Laconia State School and Lakes Region facility in Laconia, New Hampshire.
This place, it's a little f***ed up to say the least. It's got a building called the Blood Building. It has a prison on campus, and it can be used as a FEMA camp. So I decided to bring this doll with us to see maybe if we can get possessed, because we're a little lonely during this pandemic and
It's just the two of us.
we want some company. All right, let's explore this thing.
From Hockamock Swamp to Dighton Rock and everything in between. Petroglyphs and monoliths and things best left unseen. Bridgewater Triangle, dark and creepy corridors, haunted asylums, and don't forget the tunnels. New England and beyond, only for the unafraid. Take a dog journey down an untraveled path that's deliciously decayed. Deliciously decayed. Deliciously decayed.
Laconia State School opened in 1903 as New Hampshire School for the Feeble-Minded. At the time, there were a lot of people living at almshouses, including kids, especially kids with disabilities. Unfortunately, at this time, a lot of families weren't able to afford the medical needs of their kids who had disabilities, so the best they could do was put them into almshouses where at least they would be able to get some food. So, the New Hampshire Federations for Women's Clubs decided that since almshouses were dangerous and still weren't able to give these kids the care that they needed, that they would appeal to the state. And the state was able to create a state school for them where they would be able to live and learn. But unfortunately, it was a bit more complicated than that and not quite as noble as it sounds. At the time, there was also the idea that people with disabilities were more predisposed to evil and moral flaws. So, while they were able to move these kids from the almshouses to a place where they could live more safely, it also would be preventing them from being exposed to these sorts of negative intentions, crimes, moral flaws, and also keep society safe from these kids who they thought were probably going to be able to start committing more crimes. So the school was literally founded on the principles of eugenics. So after the school closed, most of the buildings around here were abandoned as well, but this is one of the few that was kept up when the prisons took over instead. When this was still part of the school, it was mostly for housing different students, and it ended up having 50 students, give or take, on each floor, which was really just described as a sea of beds, and there was no separation between them at all, no privacy or anything like that. Once this was taken over by the prison, though, this building ended up having a much more mundane use, where it was more towards offices and training for the prison staff.
So this school was founded on the ideology of eugenics, which often meant that the patients could be seen as subhuman. The founder believed that feeble-mindedness needed to be snuffed out at its root, and because they legally couldn't kill the patients, they did the next best thing: isolating them. Patients were admitted to the school for a variety of reasons, including cognitive and developmental delays, epilepsy, behavioral issues. Many were orphans below the poverty line, and their parents didn't know what to do with them. There was some staff that tried to do the right thing. They attempted to bring the kids off campus for the holidays, but the school very often found itself to be short-staffed. Things did start to improve, however, in the early 50s. There was a new superintendent who was a teacher, They started to respect the patient's privacy. They implemented some programs where the parents can come in, be part of things, different things like that, and the quality of life had improved. But 8 years later, that superintendent was ousted by the New Hampshire Department for Retarded Children, which was composed mainly of parents, and much of the conditions worsened once again.
So, well, the patients were treated pretty badly in all of the different wards. This one was the absolute worst. They referred to it as the back wards and tried to keep everyone who wasn't already living here or staff away from it. After a while, when the school was opened, they had let parents come in for tours in different buildings just to see what their kids were doing and just what the places were like. And while conditions were pretty bad there, this one they wouldn't even do tours in because of how bad they kept it. They kept all of their most severely disabled students here and really didn't do anything to stimulate them or take care of them. They just had to sit around in their beds with no recreational area, no stimulation, and really nothing to even try to take care of them. It was really fucked up.
So we had talked about eugenics a little bit in a prior episode, but just to reiterate what it is, it's a concept that became very popular between 1910 and 1920. And it was essentially linking feeble-mindedness and mental conditions, developmental conditions, and things like that to the criminal brain. And it was thought that these quote-unquote bad genes needed to be isolated and snuffed out for the betterment of society. This was something later adopted by the Nazis, more with race, but this is the origins of eugenics. By 1915, it had become illegal for anybody with lunacy, anybody with any severe cognitive delays, epilepsy, and anything along those lines to breed. Women under 45 were not allowed to be married. And if anyone broke these rules, it was punishable by heavy fines and imprisonment. Shortly thereafter this, many patients were beginning to be sterilized. It had become legal to do so, as long as the patient or a legal guardian had consented. That did not last. Pretty soon, it had only required 3 signatures by doctors. The superintendent could be one of them, and the head doctor could be another one. And consent was no longer necessary to be sterilized. In fact, nobody was able to leave this facility unless they were sterilized, which was considered to be cured. 75% of them were women, 25% of them were men, and by the time this facility closed, there was somewhere between 500 and 700 people sterilized.
So in the end, this school really just had to go. Between the mistreatment, the overcrowding, and the angry parents, with very good reason, I may add, there's no way it should have stayed open as long as it did. Even superintendents from other similar schools out of state were horrified at the way that the students were treated, and they couldn't imagine them living like that in their schools. So a group of parents filed a lawsuit against the state for failing to live up to their own laws. The Division of Mental Health was supposed to have been able to establish and maintain a system that would be helpful in taking care of people with disabilities and really just giving them the best opportunities as possible. And clearly Laconia State School was not doing that. So the court ordered the school to decrease the number of residents to 230. Instead, the school just decided to keep reducing until there was no one left. And in 1991, the school just finally shut its doors, and good fucking riddance.
Once the school had shut down, it converted into a medium-risk prison called Lake Regional Facility. As time went on, it became less and less risk. A lot of the patients were able to restore the old buildings, partake in substance abuse courses, and different things like that. Many of the women by 1997 had been moved into halfway houses. The state had planned on increasing the number of inmates from 300 to 600. This never fully happened due to the recession of 2009. The facilities had closed down, with about 25 inmates staying behind to help with its closure.
So up until recently, the Lakeshore Redevelopment Planning Commission had been doing a lot of work to improve the campus for what's left of the school and the prison. Their goal was to try to keep the history going and maybe create some local jobs and senior living. But unfortunately, in early 2021, there was a bit of an unpleasant surprise that might make all of their work irrelevant. What happened was there was a companion bill that was stuck into the 2022-2023 state budget. And that bill allowed the governor and an executive committee to sell or lease the property however they wanted. And it's pretty unlikely that it would be in a way that anybody else would really want. So that's a bit of a problem. It also lets them just sidestep any existing restrictions on the land use to just do whatever they want with it. The mayor and the commission and locals really wanted to just keep it as a way to preserve their history, since a lot of people there did have some connection to the school or the prison. But the governor is probably going to sell it to some private redeveloper who's just going to knock everything down and maybe turn it into condos or a strip mall or something stupid like that. There were some negotiations, but they were kind of postponed for a little bit because of the pandemic, but it does look like the commission's still trying to stay involved, but the governor seems to be leaning towards trying to sell it off as soon as possible, so we'll really just have to see what happens. In 1941, Chemung Cemetery was opened as Laconia State School's cemetery. Before this point, they had a tendency to bury their residents in unmarked graves around the campus. There's currently some plan going to try to do some excavation to see if they can find anything, since apparently bodies can cause some ground pollution. If they do find anything, they fully intend to try to identify their remains and contact any relatives in the area if they can find them. There is actually a quote I found from someone who used to work on the farm that said, "If you're going to plow the fields, don't plow too deep. You never know what you're going to find buried there." So when they did start to actually bury them in this cemetery, they buried about 170 of their residents. Unfortunately, they were only marked with unmarked wooden crosses, and the caretakers tended to remove them and put them back haphazardly every time they went to mow the lawn. So the group of parents who have really just been the only advocates of this place for some reason, in 1978, the parents were able to get the burial records for the cemetery, and they were able to get more permanent markers for the graves. So now if you go, you'll be able to see people's names and dates, and not just an unmarked wooden cross.
So it's now time for my famous segment, Is It Haunted? Yes, but I think all of New Hampshire is pretty much, like, once you get north of Manchester, it's like, yeah, the whole state. We stayed at this inn. I won't mention the name in case they don't want us to, but it was built in the 1700s, restored, very nice place to stay. But you felt like eyes were on you the whole time, you know. In the middle of the night, you're walking down these small, tight corridors, and you could hear like a guy in a room playing this melancholy accordion music. Like, what the fuck? Like, that's something out of a horror movie. You couldn't write that. So he's doing that all night. Meanwhile, you know, we went downstairs to eat. And because it's like this little bed and breakfast, it's like, you just didn't feel like you were the only one there. It's just a bizarre feeling. As far as the grounds themselves of the school, it's gotta be the most depressing place. Maybe it's just the copious amounts of barbed wire, a building called Blood, you know, and a lot of these other places that are falling apart. Man, it's definitely got a feel to it. And inside, the amount of anxiety was overwhelming. I don't know if it was the mold and asbestos in there, but I couldn't wait to get the fuck out. So much anxiety, you know. The whole time I felt like somebody was going to start tapping me on the shoulder. It just had a weird feeling to it. Now, I've been to a lot of these places, and I think that's the only one where I wanted to leave, having nothing to do with potentially getting in trouble. But we did. We did get in trouble too. So we almost got arrested, and one cop was being, you know, real serious, and the other cop was like dying to tell us about the supernatural. And she was, you know, like, you guys see anything? People always say they see stuff up there. So yeah, we want to go and we want to find her and we want to like isolate her and be like, hey, do you want to use your power to get us in here? But yeah, so that was kind of funny. But yeah, in conclusion, yeah, there's something going on in there, and how could there not be? I mean, I feel like if any place is haunted, it's this. Well, I guess that concludes another episode of Deliciously Decayed at the Laconia State School. What you think?
This was definitely the darkest one that we've looked into so far. And unfortunately we couldn't get quite as much footage on site as we wanted to since we ended up getting rained out. But now we're in this pretty badass hotel.
They say it's better to get pissed off than pissed on. You see, my camera gear was pissed on by a random dog. Full on piss.
We just ran over and started pissing on it, and we really don't know why.
And it was also raining, and now there's a winter storm advisory. It's literally the end of April, so this is New England kind of sucking.
Yeah, what the fuck, New England?
But yeah, like she said, we're in a really nice place, and they upgraded us to the King Suite for no reason. So
no complaints though.
Gotta look at the positive. So yeah, with that being said, I'm still not sterilized.
That's true, neither am I.
I'm feeling good about that. So yeah, I guess that concludes our episode. So remember to give us a like, smash that sub. I am Rick.
And I'm Deb. See you in New England's darkest corners.